Hi, my name is Stephanie Hertz, Marketing Director at WorkForest. WorkForest is the proud premier sponsor of CNU's Lifelong Learning Society, and we welcome you to the Riverside Lecture Series. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Taylor Lee, a memory care navigator. As a memory care navigator, Taylor provides individualized supportive service to patients and caregivers navigating a dementia diagnosis. She graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University with a Master of Social Work. Prior to studying at VCU, she attended Virginia State University. Taylor has obtained a wealth of experience in geriatrics, mental health, social service, and school social work. For over 6 years, Taylor worked for the Alzheimer's Association Greater Richmond chapter with a clear focus to provide care and support for those impacted by dementia and to implement strategies to meet the needs of the community. She has expertise in support group facilitation, early stage engagement programs, and in leading diversity and inclusion programs. Taylor has a tremendous passion for supporting older adults and shares a personal connection to dementia, which is a driving force for her desire to ensure families are fully supported and equipped for the journey ahead. She continues to be motivated to work alongside a great team to make an impact on the lives of families now and in the future. Please give a warm welcome to Taylor Lee as she talks about finding support across generations.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I am thankful for that introduction, and I guess we can kind of just dive right in. So today we're going to be talking about finding support across generations. But before we do that, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about who I am and where I come from and why I do what I am doing. So I'm actually a social worker by trade, as she mentioned before, but I have been able to work alongside other team members at the Martha W. Goodson Center, and I now take on the position of a memory care navigator. And at the Martha W. Goodson Center, we have kind of a clear focus, and that is really to provide an innovative approach to exciting concepts and healthy connections with individuals facing challenges of aging and caregiving with an expert care and support. So some services that we offer here at the Martha W. Goodson Center, which is located in Williamsburg, is our geriatric assessment clinic, where we kind of look at patients holistically to identify ways to age well as identify any changes to cognition and help to create good treatment plans. We also offer support through our Jane D. McKinney driving rehabilitation program, which allows us to evaluate and give individuals a baseline if they have any challenges with driving or just have any concerns with that. We also offer memory care navigation, which I'll talk to you more about, but that is what I can contribute to the Martha W. Goodson Center, and just allows us to provide direct support to families and persons living with any form of memory change. We also have a resource library, which allows us to continuously provide information and resources to families or individuals who just need that extra support. We offer individual and caregiver support groups, as well as a Riverside learning series. So with memory care navigation, I won't talk too much about this because I know that it was shared during my introduction, but the goal of memory care navigation is to really provide a specialized, personalized approach to families. So each family is different and their support and needs are different. So meeting with a memory care navigator can really be beneficial because I and/or my colleagues can really help throughout this entire process. So initially you may not need as many supports, but you might need some validation, normalization, and maybe some support with planning ahead. And then as the process progresses for some individuals, you may need somebody to kind of help continuously add resources, continuously add support, and give guidance. And that's what I can do for individuals. So let's talk a little bit about caregiving. So I'm going to take the very infamous words of our former First Lady, Mrs. Rosalind Carter, by saying that there are only four kinds of people in this world. Those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will need caregivers, and those, oh, did I say four? Let me back that up. Those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, and those who will need caregiving. So to kind of put that into more perspective, if you say, well, that kind of I don't identify with the concept of caregiving. Just to give some statistics, 53 million Americans are currently serving as caregivers for someone who is aging or disabled. And so if you say, well, again, that statistic doesn't resonate with me, think about what caregiving is. So if an individual is helping with running errands or going to the grocery store, and now we have, the online shopping, so that might be something that's being done. If they're providing wound care to someone, if they're helping with managing prescriptions or putting together a pill box ahead of time so that person knows how to get it, or even administers medication from time to time, if they are cooking, cleaning, and providing any level of support in that way, whether it is near or far, they are considered a caregiver. So to give some more fact behind this whole concept of caregiving, I want to talk about the aging process and maybe some statistics as it relates to that. So 3 out of 4 of people who age want to age at home. And from that, we know that the aging long-term care process could be on an average, likely more, and sometimes for individuals less, but on an average, it is at least 3 years in the home. So to add to that, we know that 70% of people who are age 25 and above are going to need lifelong care. So again, to break this down just a little bit more, we'll think about the statistics as it relates to Virginia. And we know that 8 million residents are in Virginia. Sounds like a lot. And 1.4 million of those individuals are considered caregivers. And then we kind of come together with an annual cost of about $11.2 billion, which equates to about $12.81. Again, just the average, likely more, and in some instances could be less. So we do know that caregiving can be expensive. So that was the idea of how it could look in home, but as it relates to long-term care outside of the home, we know it can be expensive. So $63,000 could be the average cost annually for assisted living. $109,000 could be the average annual cost for private nursing, and almost $60,000 could be for home care in the home and or in a facility. So we know that this job is expensive. So we know a little bit about caregiving. We know who that impacts. We know the significance. I kind of also want to talk to you about what is the significance of building a good care team. Because we can identify as caregivers, maybe some of us, but also I want to hone in on the idea that having a good care team is important. And the reason why a good care team is important is because, in the medical field, a care team, or in general, a care team can really look like a family. So a direct caregiver, a doctor, family members, friends, and in other cases, it could be more. It could be extended family, church members. It can look different. But that is what we consider a good care team. And what we know the benefits of a good care team is that when we all kind of work together to provide support to that individual and caregiver, which is equally important, we know that the outcomes of their care and caregiver stress is significantly reduced. And again, this can look different from each family, depending on family dynamics, location, and a plethora of other things. But we do know that the value of having a good caregiver or caregiving system or care team is pretty significant. So when we're thinking about support across generations, we're thinking of different types of caregivers. And there are a lot of different types of caregivers, but just to give a few examples, caregiving can be with a spouse. A caregiver can be with peers or community, adult children, and then of course it could look different for individuals where that could be extended family and friends. So, of course, if we're going to talk about across the generations, let's kind of talk about what those generations are. So quite naturally, there are more generations than I'm going to talk to you about. So I will just start with millennials. So millennials, this generation are those who are born between 1980 and 1996, and they represent at least 10 million of the total caregivers in the United States. And it, of course, is said to be increasing as time goes on. So we know who the millennials are and what part of the population they represent. So then I want to talk to you about what could be identified as potentially strengths of this generation as it relates to caregiving. So the first is having a strong sense of self-awareness. Not necessarily different from other generations, but maybe this is something that is probably talked about amongst peer groups a little more. Then also, I feel like this generation could be a part of this culture where boundary setting and self-help culture is big. It's something that's talked about more. They can be more firm in their decision making and boundary setting, and oftentimes or can appear to stick to those core values. They are comfortable with technology, which means that, there is more of resources available online, and they're comfortable navigating that as well as finding supports and other alternatives online. I also included that they can be more adaptable. And the reason why that is because, yes, they're a part of this technology community. However, they were a part of a community growing up that didn't necessarily have a lot of technology. So can at times become a little bit flexible. Also, with this generation, we're seeing now, of course, in the workforce that it could be more flexible in their work and or not in some instances, as well as earning opportunities. And then lastly, health appears to be a high priority, going back again to what those boundary settings and self-help culture, just staying firm to what are those core values. And then just to give a few, I really could fill up this page, but just for the sake of the presentation, some of the challenges could be that, as a millennial, maybe they are not fully secure in their career choice just yet. And so finances can be a little bit limited at this stage of life, or not for some individuals. They are considered to be what we call sandwich caregivers because oftentimes they are providing support to their adult loved one or parent, as well as starting a family of their own. And then at times it could be that they have a weaker support system, not necessarily non-existent, but just weaker because they haven't been able to cultivate that support system just yet. Again, I could fill the page, but just to give an example. So then we move over to the Gen X, and it's interesting, these names, but the Gen X population, which, is those individuals who are born between 1965 and 1980. And this is kind of the peak of the sandwich generation. And so for this generation, these are individuals who have already kind of started to have families. Children are still living at home. So they are certainly taking on a more of an increased responsibility with their children, aging adult, as well as starting to see some need to be responsible for spouses as well. And then they also add to about 24%, or a little over 24% of adults who are age 45 to 64 who are caregivers, identify as caregivers. So again, could fill up the page, but to note some challenges with this particular population, we know that working is something that they are still doing. And so, there are priorities that are associated with that can have a large impact on their ability to work as well as caregive. And to note that they are still working full time. Also, statistics have shown that they identify a financial impact of both working, managing their own families, as well as caregiving. And that can really start to tap into some other financial hardships, meaning that sometimes for individuals, they can have to tap into other funds that they weren't necessarily looking to do as a result to being able to provide support to a loved one. And then also challenges with this group could be, amongst others, are moderately high emotional stress just for having to manage the two. And then also feeling a lot of times that there is no other avenue to providing support to their loved ones and almost feel obligated in that role. So some strengths, again, just to note a few, is that this generation can be said to be very resourceful. They can have a stronger support system, whether that relates to peers as well as family members, and may tend to be more inclined to reach out to professional supports as well. And then, in some instances, if not many, can really have more of a financial means to provide support. So then we'll move into baby boomers, which are from 1946, or were born between 1946 and 1964. So to give some statistics as it relates to this, 1 in 4 baby boomers are caregivers currently. In this generation, they are more likely to be women, and they are more likely to be white as compared to African Americans, and then they are also providing care for at least 2 years or more. So pretty significant amount of time, as well as they make up 38% of caregivers in the US. So some noted challenges for this group could be that there is changes in their own personal health. So having to manage those changes amongst having to support another loved one. Increased mental distress could be apparent here just from overall life stressors, as well as just the overall impact of caregiving, which could be present in all generations or any form of caregiving, as well as competing priorities with work and family. So we kind of talked a little bit about generations, and we also talked a little bit about building a care team. But I also want to kind of highlight the impacts of what it looks like when we don't necessarily have a good care team. And the impacts of that is it's significantly just caregiver burnout and what that can look like for caregivers. So just to note a few, and I know that it's kind of small writing, but of course that could lead to depression, that could lead to health challenges, that could lead to some more risk for obtaining other health challenges. And so just to kind of note a few, that if a care team is not in place and somebody feels like the brunt of the work has to fall on them, there are at times negative implications that can be associated with health as well as mental health. So after we think about what it looks like to be burnt out as a caregiver, I also want to identify what are some resources that can be available. So I want to go back again to memory care navigation and being able to highlight the fact that as a memory care navigator, it is our job to really identify what is going on now and how can we help to manage that with you as well as possible. What are resources that need to be put in place in order for you to be as supported as possible, but then also helping you to manage for the future. Or plan for the future. And then in addition to that, just kind of being that stepping stone with you throughout the course of the way. So that is always a resource that is available to families at no cost. And then also there are support groups. So usually support groups are for caregivers, but there are a lot of support groups that are for persons that are living with some type of memory change, as well as their care partners. As well as memory cafes, which really help to increase socialization for those who are impacted by any form of cognitive change. And then, of course, there are online groups or virtual groups that are available for caregivers if, getting out or having some flexibility in their schedule becomes more of a challenge. We also have respite programs that are available in the community that can really help to offer time back to the caregiver and really help them to fill their cup. And I don't necessarily have it on this slide, but at the Martha W. Goodson Center, we do have 2 opportunities that I'd love to talk to you about. So the first opportunity is our Fearless Caregiver Conference that will be coming up next week. And I will give more information about that. But that's an opportunity where we can really work to identify and help you with education as well as resources to really help the caregiving process. And then after that, we have what we call a caregiver cruise, which really helps us to kind of debrief, be around others who share similar experiences. And that will be on the Spirit of Norfolk. And just another way to hone in on the idea that caregiver self-care is very vital and important. And that can be information that I provide to you as well. So I've kind of gone through my presentation kind of quickly, but I think that leaves us a lot of room for questions. By chance, do we have any questions? Yes. That's a good question. So the question was that I noted that I work in Williamsburg. So are there similar resources in Newport News? So the Martha W. Goodson Center is a Riverside program or center, or is under the Riverside umbrella. So that means that we can provide support throughout the Riverside footprint. So coming to Williamsburg is an option, or us coming to you is another option. But Riverside's footprint is our service area. That's a good question. Any other questions or comments or any questions as it relates to caregiving?
How does one get assessed as to a memory problem?
As to a memory, to identify that there's a memory problem?
Yes.
Okay. So if in fact someone experiences changes that they're aware of, and or if family members can identify changes, you can always go to your primary care physician and share your changes. In addition to that, I'll plug the geriatric assessment clinic that we have at the Martha W. Goodson Center as being an added resource. So at the Martha W. Goodson Center Geriatric Assessment Clinic, you can be what we consider to be a worried well, or the well worried, where, you're not quite sure if this is a significant change or not, or maybe you notice some significant changes and you just want to get an understanding as to what may be causing it, and or get a baseline to figure out where you are now in comparison to where you may be later. So again, you can always, go to your primary care physician or sign up to come to the geriatric assessment clinic, which does not require a referral. It could be a self-referral.
Okay, this is kind of a 2-part question.
Okay.
I have MS and my main symptom is brain fog.
Okay.
So there's some memory issues, or it takes a little while for it to actually retrieve the word or
Right.
whatever it is. It's not really a memory issue. It's an MS symptom.
Right.
And how does that fit in with the geriatric part of memory?
Mm-hmm.
And the other part is, my wife and I, we don't have kids, we don't have family.
Right.
So you're talking about the care team. Yeah, we have doctors,
Mhm.
but we don't have a wide
Right.
swath of friends that are that our friends are our age,
Yeah.
and they're not going to be able to be part of our care team as we
Right.
get older. So how do you address, you being those of an age, how do we address that aspect of the care team?
Right. Good question. So, as we know, changes in memory are not necessarily just associated with dementia, and it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have changes with cognition, it's going to lead, or it's, in the path of dementia. It could be very well what you said, be contributed to another diagnosis. So we understand that as well. And so I say that the services that we offer or the supports that we offer would be inclusive to other, health challenges that lead or cause memory changes, such as your own. And I think it's kind of a good segue to the second question of, I don't necessarily have, I don't have children, maybe the family that I have is either limited or I don't have that. So what does a care team look like for me? And I will say in that instance, it could be connecting to a place like the Martha W. Goodson Center, where myself or another colleague could be a part of your care team, where we can kind of help you and your wife navigate, of course, the healthcare system and resources, helping you to plan for the future, but then also kind of be that tag along as you move forward in life in general. So it goes back to the point that I made. It looks different for each family. Everybody's not going to necessarily have adult children. They're not going to have extended family, but may have to rely on supports like memory care navigation or medical social workers or, care managers within the community to be a part of that care team. So that's a good question.
What is the cost of an assessment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very good question. So a large part of the memory or the geriatric assessment is covered by insurance, but there is an out-of-pocket fee of $290 that it comes with the visit as well. And the benefit of the $290 is that it covers the first and follow-up visit. So when you come back again for that follow-up, you don't have to pay anything else. And then for individuals who find the $290 to be a little bit too much, we can always offer a sliding scale as well.
Do you know if Medicare covers services at the Goodson Center?
That's a good question. So all the services at the Goodson Center are free with the exception of the driving evaluation, as well as the geriatric assessment, and Medicare alone does not cover that at all. Regardless of what insurance you have, there's always going to be an out-of-pocket fee, but we can, work with a sliding scale for families that need that.
Do we have any other questions?
And I'll also ask, are there any other hardships of caregiving that maybe weren't mentioned on the presentation? Yes.
My parents are now deceased, but my mom developed Alzheimer's, and my dad and my mom were of the age where when they were young, nursing homes where people were shuttled off to die out of sight. So they were very adamant about not wanting to go into nursing home. And my dad was not in the best place in terms of providing care.
Okay.
So how do you deal with family members that they know how to do it? Yeah, I put that in quotes. They know how to do it. They know they can take care of their spouse. So there's nobody better, yada, yada, yada. So how do you convince somebody that they need more than what they can provide?
Yeah, absolutely. We hear from families all of the time that say, this was the declaration of my parents. They do not want to be placed. They want to age well, or they want to age in their home, and they want us to be the caregiver that provides that support. And while the intention is phenomenal, it doesn't necessarily always work that way. And I think the rule of thumb has to be whether or not you can provide adequate support. And so when we're making promises and planning for the future, we should definitely include that. We should include, I can keep you at home for as long as possible, but only if I can provide the best support to you, the most effective support. And if it becomes out of my realm and you need additional support, we really need to start thinking about other options. And having those conversations early is very helpful, because then it allows for the person who may have to be in that situation to be able to provide their input and how they would want that to look. But I definitely understand that and hear it pretty often. But if it impacts the risk of your health, of your mental health, and your ability to provide the most efficient care, which is important for overall quality of life, it's something that has to be reconsidered and sometimes takes for, you know, a professional to be able to really identify what are we looking at now and what are the potential risks if we continue down this path. That's a good question. Absolutely. That is true, where, you know, feeling overzealous about your ability to do so, or not being aware of where your loved one may fit in this category. So, you know, for instance, someone may say, you know, my loved one is perfectly fine. They can do for themselves. Well, what does that really mean? Can they do for themselves without you being there at all? You know, if you are not there, would they be able to do their medications? If you were not there, would they be able to remember to take a shower and put on the appropriate clothing? You know, if you removed yourself from the equation, could they be able to do that independently? And what toll is that taking on you having to be that for them? And for some individuals that works, you know, a system is put in place, they have a good care team, and it can be something that can be managed. But even with a good care team, you know, it may come a time where having another option is something that has to be talked about. And it doesn't mean that there is failure on anybody's part. It just means that their health has persisted in a way that needs additional support.
A comment online.
Okay.
They said maybe not related, but as I'm looking into my own future, how do I find the right independent living center in a different state, maybe closer to family before you have major issues?
That's a good question. Well, there are professionals that you know, can really help with navigating that process. But I tell families this all the time: be familiar with what resources are available in your community. Look into them, see how you feel about it, see what resources are available in those communities, and then work on, you know, planning based off of what's there. But I'd imagine being in a different state is a little hard. So I do think that there are resources that are available that can really help with that, but I'm not sure, you know, off the top of my head specifics.
And there, kind of an add-on to that, when you say memory issues, is
Yeah.
there like a list of what those would be?
Yeah. So I always relate to it as like mentioned, memory issues or memory changes, because we know that can be caused by a lot of different things. And so if you happen to have any questions about that, you certainly can reach out to me. But, you know, an example of changes that are associated with memory could be, you know, mild cognitive impairment, dementia and all forms of dementia. It could be other health diagnoses that have changes with cognition, like mentioned before. MS could be one. So there are a lot of different health challenges or diagnoses that can lead to changes in cognition. Absolutely. As well as just our brains and bodies change as we age, which we know that to be.
And one more question here. What can you do if the person will not take medication to help with depression, anxiety when it's prescribed by a doctor?
Yeah, that is a good one. So, you know, there are a lot of different approaches to that. And a lot of times it could come from not necessarily the direct caregiver. You know, a lot of times that may have to come from another person like the doctor or social worker or someone else. But I think also having a good routine is important. And then creating a lot of good feeling around taking the medications. Another way that I find that patients are more resistant is when they feel targeted. They feel like they don't identify with why they have to take medication, or why others identify this as being a problem. So if we can kind of normalize it for them and make it more of a task that you're doing together, and maybe, you know, you're taking your medications with them, or you take similar medications, or whatever the case might be, and make it more about something that could be done together, as opposed to something that's being, the approach shouldn't be targeted, or sometimes is not helpful if it's targeted. And I think that approach can be helpful.
Do you have any statistics for familial diagnosis? So if you have a parent that has dementia or Alzheimer's, the chances of you having those same issues?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I don't have the specific statistics on that. But what we think of when we think of parents or family members having a form of dementia, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will obtain a form of dementia. It just means that you are at a more increased risk. Very similar to if you have challenges like diabetes or cardiac disease. It doesn't necessarily mean that you, in fact, will get it. It just means that you're at a more increased risk and should probably do or take measures to reduce your risk. Any other questions or comments? Well, you all have been great, and thank you so much for having me. And I'll stick around if anybody has any additional questions. And I will make sure that everybody has our contact information if anybody needs to reach out in the meantime. So thank you.
Thank you so much.